I realise that I'm going to probably talk quite quickly through some stuff, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the emergence. Where does Measurable get these ideas from? And I suppose it's quite an eclectic model, I suppose, or eclectic theory. There's ideas from political analysis, from psychoanalysis, from Marxist critical thought, I suppose, and social philosophy. So from Dewey's early work on how we make meaning in terms of experience and participation in learning. All the theorists that's contributed to his thinking are about trying to understand how adults make meaning in their lives. So there's a central thing that runs through all of this. Gould's work around psychoanalysis and trying to understand how adults transform in terms of, he actually talks about the disorientating dilemmas that we outlined. Freire's work, we know, hopefully, and people have spoken about tonight, that political analysis about transformation being about social action and political action, rather than some more of the, I suppose, cognitive, individualised models, which is one of the, what's that? You like his pipe? I like his pipe too, that's why the picture's there. Okay. So he talks about meaning structures, how people create and structure meaning in their lives as adults, and how learn attaches to that. Kuhn's work on paradigm shifts and how meaning changes, and both within science and within social science. And Habermas's view on critical reflection, critical dialogue. Although Mesereau doesn't take on board all aspects of all these theorists, so he certainly doesn't take on this kind of ideological stuff.
Habermas, just not to spend too long on it, or Habermas, I'm not absolutely sure, made a distinction that was really important to Mesereau. So he distinguished between two different types of learning: communicative learning and not instructional. Instrumental learning. So there's communicative learning, and instrumental learning. In instrumental learning, we take part in, or we learn in an instrumental way when we, for example, fix a bike or design a car or build a bridge, something like that has a direct aim. Whereas communicative learning takes place when we maybe listen to a poem, or we have there's much more conversational between people and in a social realm, as opposed to instrumental. So those two things are at play for Mesereau as well, and they influenced what he did later on.
Okay, and the last one up there is around, I suppose, much more of a psychological cognitive focus, which is one of the things that we'll get on to talking about in terms of I suppose criticism of the moment. And also just to say quickly that there are strands of transformative theory. That they are, so we've got Freire and Mesereau who are talking about consciousness raising and critical reflection, transformation being social and much more individual for Mesereau as opposed to Freire. There's Boyd's stuff on Jungian, I suppose much more psychotherapeutic, a Jungian view of individuation, how people understand meaning from psychotherapeutic viewpoints. And Deleuze's work is much more about people constructing meaning through different. Oh, sorry, I thought it was quite wrong. Find meaning as what motivates meaning. So actually, a lot of his work's about when you get to midlife. You're interested in your age stuff. When you get to midlife, actually what makes meaning for you in midlife is different than what makes meaning for you when you're younger, and indeed when you're older, and how that's constructed. And Brookfield's there really just, he talks about a lot of motivation about critical analysis and critical reflection and challenging, I suppose, larger power structures within that. And there's a lot of stuff on the online resource about sort of different fields. Yeah, sure. So what facilitates transformative learning? Well, directive, active, engaging work which stimulates reflection. So a lot of this is about trying to connect with experience and trying to connect, I suppose, critically. Dialogue, encouraging dialogue, which obviously the word can much up. It's about situated learning, so making sure that learning is context appropriate. And it's also about relationship, although relationship's not that well understood. What is it about relationship? Because of course, to think critically about something, one of the things that I suppose people need to learn in learning, and adult learning particularly, is safety. And actually, learning in itself is quite an unsafe thing. Yeah, because actually to really critically think and change the things that you've talked about changing actually isn't necessarily a safe process. So it's a question about whether safety is necessarily, you know, a group experience, or that it's not safety necessarily individually. Does that make sense? Or I'm just rambling because it's 8 o'clock. Okay. Now we've got this thing, and this is Jim's, right? And really, it's Scrooge. Is it Scrooge?
That's Scrooge.
It's Scrooge. And Jim had this
future.
Yeah, this future. So this is very much about. Jim had this huge thing about Scrooge, didn't you? And how this is Scrooge is a transformation. You know, he's somebody who went on a transformative journey. And so that's why Scrooge
is transformed at the end of the story.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I was doing educating Rita actually, but so I was doing Rita, but he was doing Scrooge. So we've ended up with Scrooge. So what does it mean for educators? What do you think this stuff means for educators?
Different way of teaching.
Different way of teaching. Yeah. What kind of things do you think?
More interactive, like we possibly experience in this class.
Yeah. Well, any other ways that you think you might be able to use this in some way, or aim towards these things, knowing that your own experience is
assessment, different ways to show the learning rather than the essay. Well, the test, the usual conventional ways we've got used to. Is that the best way to actually show? Because we know some people are really good at passing tests, and you go to a pub quiz with them, they're useless. And oh, general knowledge, they don't have those extra things.
Yeah, sure. So shifting the model, the traditional model into...
Well, I've got people in mind, so...
I think the emphasis is more on, for an educator, especially in the assessment terms, a transformative journey being an important focus rather than starting here, finishing there. Yeah. And that's the two bits that you're focusing on.
Okay, and how you would, I suppose, get people to understand what their journey's been. So I suppose methods to get people to, journaling quite often and stuff like that. I don't know, I think there's a few ideas of it, case study simulations. Role play, haven't done any of that. We're now going to do a role play, or we're not kidding. Okay. So it's about safe, trust and care. It's about teachers being co-learners, and so that kind of very Freudian idea of flatness between relationship is quite important. And you're also role models as educators for people. Yeah. Being critical of your own assumptions, the own assumptions that you make, tiny up here 11 weeks ago, and the assumptions that others make. So as an educator, you've got to challenge your own assumptions as well as helping learners challenge theirs. Provide learners practicing critical practice and recognising their frames of reference. So where is it that people start from? What is it that you come in with? And how is it that you help people journey into transformation?
And that ties to a safe space as well. Yeah. Providing people with an opportunity to divulge where they're coming from.
And lots of discourse, lots of critical discourse as well. So which is about, I suppose, trying to understand and see, but challenge your opinions, your beliefs, your value base. What you can hold in. And it's about equal participation. Just again, picking up some of that stuff. So is that Scrooge transformed? Do you still?
I don't think it's transformed.
I don't think it's transformed.
Not enough.
Okay, so for learners, he still looks really scary. Yeah. Okay, what does it mean? For learners, what you need to bring in this, I suppose, relationship is diversity and collaboration. It's about being critical of your own assumptions and being open to be able to criticise your own assumptions. Yeah. To participate in discourse and discussions, so you have to come to be in it as it was, and you need to be willing to engage in activities that might lead to transformation. So you basically be up for it. Yeah. Okay. Going to say I just had. Well, you need to. Yeah, that's probably not the best. That's another one. I thought we'd get Kirsty and Phil in here from location.
I've got a story about that.
Yes, I know you have. I told you the other day.
I've thought again.
Yeah.
Not careful.
Okay, it's good though. Context matters, and we've heard lots of input about how context is important from China and from Latin America and from Europe and from Scotland. So the context, I suppose the political and social and cultural context in which learning is taking place is really, really important. I suppose we had a case study, and you can read more about this on the online resource, because I realise our time is short, and I'm not going to try and read out Botswana language. Someone can give it a go, I suppose.
Moto Kabato Babagwe.
Fantastic! Excellent.
Wonderful.
Okay. And the difference in Africa, obviously, or in some parts of Africa, because I'm not sure that we can make the assumption that all of Africa is exactly the same, is that rather than that kind of quite European view or North American view that you know, I'm very, very individualised. I think, therefore, I am that kind of Descartesian view of the universe. I am because we are. So there's this. You exist as an African person because you are part of a collective. You don't exist in your own self. Yeah. And there is no self without the collective. So you can't exist almost separately. So the idea of selfhood is really, really different. Therefore, the way that you would educate in Africa is really very different. The learning is contextualised in a community. It's the community that learns, and you have a responsibility to participate in educating the community. Yes, so you become educator. And I love this quote, and I know it's a picture of zombies, but hey, it's 8 o'clock and maybe quite, yeah. But I love this quote from this Miriam paper. There is this relationship between citizenship, community and lifelong learning. And again, it just chimes with the stuff that you were talking about in China and the cultural context with older people. In Africa, learning is a lifelong process that could not be separated from the rest of life's activities. Anyone who fails to learn is regarded as the living dead. And I'm just, you know, where does that fit with some of the stuff that we talked about tonight? Really, really powerful image. So, I'm going to hand you over to Laurie for the last bit, which is...
So, we don't want this to be like an advert for transformative learning. It's not that we think that it's done and dusted and there's one model that sort of fits everything. In fact, some of these problematic issues around transformative learning are quite present as soon as you sort of start to pick it apart a little bit. There is no single model, and like you say, different cultures, different, you know, even from place to place within Britain will have different emphasis. So, yeah, there's nothing that's been entirely sort of encapsulated as to what it is, and there's still lots of areas that's being researched as well. So, as Joyce touched on, the individualism, rational thinking of the West is something that's criticised in it as well, rather than a thought of global perspective, perhaps, or more community-led engagement. Importance of emotion, spirituality, which is something that Dirks writes about a lot, probably most in terms of Jungian theory as well. The importance of emotion, spirituality, as well as the rational cognitive. So the fact that we have an emotional response to these situations is an area that's been researched, but not to the same extent as the rational cognitive parts of the theory. So it's something that people are getting to grips with a little bit more, Dirks in particular. Assumption of liberation, transformation as positive. So I watched something that Stephen Brookfield was saying about how he had a conversation with Mesro. They worked together for a while, so I'm assuming they had quite a few. He was saying, well, what if someone transforms into a KKK member, a white supremacist, having not done that before? Surely they've engaged in a transformative learning experience through whatever negative we may view as negative. Whereas Mesro responded to him in saying that in transformative learning, you always expand your view and it doesn't narrow. But there's still, obviously, it could be said that the new KKK member is expanding his view or her view. So yeah.
I think that's really, sorry when to cut in, but I think that's a really important point, especially some of the stuff that you were talking about women. So, and there has been some studies showing that, you know, you kind of increase women's and knowledge and awareness about the fact that they're actually oppressed, but they can't actually do anything about it because they don't have the power to transform. So the idea that all this stuff's liberatory, and even Freud stuff, that everything is liberatory, surely cannot be true, because as Stephen Brookfield's argue, transformation would be overthrowing those systems.
Yeah,
Yeah,
real
so
transformation.
it's, interesting.
Okay, so just, no, that's good. Catalysts for transformative learning. So I think Miriam again wrote about surely some sort of transformation has to have occurred before we arrive at the situation of the disorder of coming into the learning space. So what does spark it off? There's some things that have been written about it, but more on the catalysts is needed as well. Need for cultural sensitivity, and I think Joyce has covered that as well in different contexts. Not clear why transformation doesn't happen. So there's not too many studies about failures in transformative learning approaches. I think the successes are often what we see. So yeah, in terms of clear data as well. You got anything? Yeah, so we've got some questions for you, I think, just to wrap up after. Should learning and teaching involve perspective change? And sort of conversations that we've been having with Jim as well, I think, in terms of art and drama, drugs and alcohol awareness, and also maths. It's like where does